There is no such thing as the Linux. Instead, there are dozens, if not hundreds of different Linux distributions which you could choose from. Which one you should actually choose depends on your needs, and I'll give you some guidelines in this video. Okay, first, before we start, again, there is no such thing as the Linux. Linux in itself is just a kernel and some small tools. So every distribution basically takes that kernel and adds what they feel like is important. Whatever I say might be completely wrong for you, because choosing the right distribution with Linux is a matter of personal preference. But that is exactly the key to understand into which direction you should look at least. So what I do is I speak of 5 different types of users and explain what those types could be looking for. The first type of user I want to talk about is the average Joe. The person that just wants to set up a system and don't want to care about it anymore. That person is interested in stable but nice looking and slick working software. That person expects a lot of support for its hardware and expects a lot of software, even proprietary one. For that kind of person, it is important to have a system that provides stability, a reasonable amount of security, a reasonable amount of customization, but in the end, jumps into the background. For that kind of user, I would recommend an Ubuntu-based distribution. The goal of the Ubuntu project is to create a Linux for everyone. Therefore, with Ubuntu, the team invests a lot into stability and into driver support. And that pays off. Ubuntu on itself is probably not the nicest looking distribution, but it just works. And it is pretty much the gold standard when it comes to Linux on the desktop. Obviously, Ubuntu with its own take on UI and its strange color scheme is not for everyone. And therefore, there are a lot of other distributions based upon Ubuntu, following Ubuntu's release cycle with a new major version every 6 months and a new long-term supported version, LTS version, every 2 years. If an Ubuntu-based system is your flavor of choice, you have a lot of choice. You can use Linux Mint, which is famous for its simplicity. You can use Elementary OS, which looks a lot like macOS. You can use Pop OS, or you could even use Lubuntu or Kubuntu, which are then again Ubuntu versions with different desktop environments. So if you are a bit like the average Joe, you just want to run your system and don't want to care about it, look into the Ubuntu world. Generally, developers also care about a stable environment, but that is not their highest priority. Their highest priority is a cutting-edge system. Actually, cutting edge might already be too old for them. So developers always look for the latest and greatest software. And it's not just some sort of toying around with things. It is required if you build software that is later on supposed to run on a huge amount of machines. You need to be in the game. You need to see what's coming and you need to adapt to that. For developers, rolling distributions are the right choice. A rolling distribution is a distribution that has no release cycle. Instead, whenever a new software is available, that new software is getting published to that distribution. Developers typically use distributions such as Fedora, OpenSUSE Tumbleweed, probably Manjaro or Endeavour OS. For developers, the most important aspect is cutting edge. even if it compromises the stability of their systems. Business users are a bit like the average Joes out there, in that they want to have a stable environment with a lot of hardware being supported. But to a business, specifically to an enterprise business, there are also other aspects pretty important, like manageability of such an environment, or commercial support, like being able to call someone and then get someone on the phone and get problems solved. They pay for the distributions. You do not necessarily need to pay for running a business-grade distribution. But for getting commercial support, you have to pay, and trust me, you have to pay a lot. Businesses typically run the enterprise versions of Linux, such as Red Hat Enterprise Linux, RHEL, or SUSE Linux Enterprise Server, SLES. Even Ubuntu can be purchased with commercial support, so that could also be a viable option. And if you want to have pretty much the same experience with a rock-solid system, with manageability and so on and so forth, but you don't want to pay the premium for commercial support, you can go with CentOS or OpenSUSE Leap. Within the Linux ecosystem, there exist specific distributions for that kind of target audience. Those distributions are pack-loaded with pen testing tools, hacking tools, and so on and so forth. So they provide their users with everything they need to understand security, to check security, and to ensure security. Typical distributions for that kind of target audience would be Kali Linux, Black Arch, or Kane. The fifth group is open source enthusiasts and advanced users. Those users typically want to be in control. They are willing to invest a lot of time, a lot of energy, and a lot of thinking into their systems to make them tailor-made, to adjust them specifically to their needs. Those users would be pretty unhappy with running, say, Ubuntu, because that is absolutely not what they want to have. They want to have exactly what they want to have. So those users use distributions such as Slackware, Gentoo, Arch Linux, perhaps Debian, but then only the net install, and then they install everything else by hand. With most of such distributions, they are even forced to compile every single application by hand. And you know what? That might sound terrible to the average user. But for that kind of target audience, including myself, that is exactly what they are looking for. Because that means ultimate control. That allows them to stay in charge and decide what they run, up until the smallest little program. So what do you make out of that? Did you find your preferred distribution? Which one is it? Or do you totally oppose what I said? Let me know in the comments below and let's start a discussion on that. And while you are there, don't forget to like, subscribe and hit the notification bell, because it helps. Thanks for watching. See you next time. And don't forget, let's make the world a better place. Until then, bye.